Hey everyone, welcome back to the TTA Performance YouTube channel. And as promised, here is our latest acquisition, Rocky, the 1980 Turbo Trans Am. This is a Tahoe blue hardtop. And we're gonna make a build series out of this car. We're gonna have several YouTube videos showing all the modifications being done, performance parts being installed, things like that, updates and upgrades, and basically just get it to be a nice running and driving car, which is not too far off from that in its current condition. Also, in this first video, I'm going to go over some things that you're going to want to look for if you're ever in the market to purchase a Turbo Trans Am. Some things that are, I think, important before making a purchase, is to make sure that things are there that need to be there, and to make sure that you're getting a good deal and a very complete car. This car here, it's actually a pretty nice piece. It does have, some pretty old tires on it and needs a little bit of fixing up, but overall, it's a very solid, nice survivor, a very nice driver, and can be made even better. So let's get to it. Let's check this thing out. So overall condition, it's pretty straight. Bottoms of the fenders are in really good shape. There's no rust or anything there. Bottoms of the doors are really good. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter what kind of car you try to buy, you're going to want to check for rust, damage, poor repairs from a previous accident, things like that. Being in the Trans Am market, just all Trans Ams, second-gen Trans Ams in general, some of the things that I like to look for is, cracked dash. That's always a big one, which this one actually has a really decent dash in it. There is a small hairline crack on the passenger side, but nothing to really be concerned about. It's very complete inside. Yeah, it's got a burn hole in the passenger seat, and some of the plastic is a little sun faded and so on, but it's nothing terrible that can't be fixed. My biggest thing is always to make sure that it is as complete as possible. So looking things over, we noticed that it does have crank windows. It does not have power door locks. It does not have cruise control. It does not have tilt wheel. It's kind of a base Trans Am. Some typical 80s modifications. We have the Alpine cassette player in the dash, and then also the panel underneath the ashtray has been cut to install a graphic equalizer. I've seen this happen a lot, but this one is actually installed really nice. I would probably keep this here because it is a pretty vintage piece and is fitting to the age of the car. As we can see in the speedometer, showing about 85,000 miles. And based on some of the things that I've seen on this car, I would say it's actual. I don't have any doubt that it's not. We do have a rip in the carpet. We do have the typical headliner sag of all GM cars of this era. But overall, it's actually in pretty nice shape. There's door jambs and everything seem to be really nice. Usually this is a common area to rust, but this one actually looks really decent. It has been repainted at one point earlier in its life. Something that's kind of neat is that it has reveal molding, or I don't know what you want to call it, some kind of dress-up chrome, which I think is an option on these cars. I have a perfect build sheet that came with it, and it does show the body side moldings on the doors. It does show that the certain options are missing options, as far as no tilt wheel and stuff. But the good part is that it is a four-wheel disc brake car, and it is a WS6 option car. So it has the 8-inch turbo wheels on it. It has the bigger rear sway bar, the quicker ratio steering box, all that stuff associated with the WS6 package. So it's kind of neat that it's a base Trans Am, but it has performance upgrades from the factory. Now, as you can see, when the car was repainted, somebody had actually gone and painted Tahoe blue into the squares of the wheels, which is actually kind of a neat and unique detail there. These tires are very old, and they're a little undersized for the car. They're smaller than stock. I kind of like the period correct GM mud flaps. I think the only thing better would be if they said Trans Am. So overall, it's in pretty decent shape. There's a little bit of hail damage in the roof and in the hood, but we're going to look and get those knocked out. When it was repainted, they never put a hood bird back on. It does show a hood bird was equipped when it was new on the build sheet. and we're probably going to be adding a hood bird to it because they just look naked without them to me. You see here, you can see there's a little bit of paint damage to the front bumper. I'm probably just going to try to touch that up a little bit. Want to make a nice driver out of it, something that somebody could really enjoy. But overall, it's in pretty good shape. So let's go over some things under the hood and let's see if it's all complete there as far as all the turbo specific stuff. So looking under the hood, one of the things, you know, just giving it an overall, I see the air conditioning is all there and hooked up, which is good to see. I've come across a lot of 301 turbos that for some reason the compressor and the brackets and air conditioning bits and pieces happen to be missing for some reason. But it's good to see that the AC is on here. Looking it over, obviously the hose accordion's missing, which is very, very common. But one of the things that stands out is the smog pump or air pump for emissions is missing, and it's been eliminated. And looking it over, we have the 2-groove water pump pulley here, which is good to see because that's the correct way to actually remove the smog pump. The smog pump controls the belt to the alternator on these cars, and originally it had a single groove power steering pump pulley. But in this case, somebody replaced it with the correct size 2-groove pulley, probably from either an earlier 301 or even a Pontiac 400. So that's good to see that at least it was done correctly. I was told by the previous owner, who had it actually quite a while, that the turbocharger was replaced at some point not too long ago, and it does look to be a remanufactured unit. One of the things that I did notice down in here, though, if I can get a shot of it, is that brass fitting for the EGR. It's very common where the EGR pipe gets seized and doesn't want to come out of the fitting. People have trouble getting it off. Apparently this one was the same way. They put a hardware store brass fitting in there with a hose barb and actually hooked a coolant hose to it, which I'm surprised it lasted this long because that's hot exhaust going through there. I'm surprised it didn't deteriorate that rubber hose yet. But that's something that we'll be eliminating as we dive into this car. Another nice little feature here is this wire loom. I probably wouldn't have done anything like this. To have this universal chrome bracket bolted directly to the exhaust, that gets pretty hot. Probably not something I would have done, but nevertheless, we'll have to change it because this is all going to go away. We're going to give it a tune-up. It's going to get the large down pipe, and we'll get everything routed correctly. But overall, I'm liking the condition of what we're seeing here. Still got the factory decals on the core support. Good to see. Overall, again, not in bad shape. We do see a few things. You got some wiring here. I'm assuming this wire is for the radio. There is another random red wire here that's not factory. I'm going to assume that's probably for the choke. I've seen a couple times where there was issues with the choke wiring and the relay and stuff like that, that somebody will just run a key-on power wire to the choke to get that to work. So we have the correct 80 air cleaner. The lid's the correct lid. I've seen them with Chevy lids on them that just look really odd. Don't know why the lid would be damaged or missing. One of the things I want to look at right away is, does it have the power enrichment valve? Yes, it does. Obviously, it doesn't look to be in the best shape, and I'll try to zoom in on it. It's this piece right here. It's got the 2 vacuum hoses coming off the top of it. It's covered in oil. Most likely it's no longer working properly, but it's going to get rebuilt. So at least it's there. We got something we can rebuild. But overall, not bad. I'm liking what I'm seeing. Another thing that we want to look at with these cars, and it's very common for them to be modified, is the carburetor. This is a very important piece with the 301 turbo. 80 and 81, depending if it's a US spec 81, there's going to be, the computer is going to be controlling the fuel of the carburetor. So I'm always wanting to make sure that it does have the correct carburetor on it, because that is the one thing that seems to get changed over a lot, mainly due to something with the engine not running properly. They automatically assume there's a carburetor issue. Oh, it's just a quadrajet, we're just going to swap it out with another quadrajet. Unfortunately, you can't really do that with this draw-through turbo system. It is best if you have the correct carburetor. So I'm going to show you guys where the carburetor number is. So so that you can verify if it is the correct one. I'm assuming this one is original and correct because it does have the power enrichment valve on it. Usually on an 80, if the carburetor is been replaced or changed, it usually ends up being that the power enrichment valve is missing also. So let's see if we can get this off. Okay. So looking at the carburetor, what the number that we're looking for is right here. 170802774. That is a correct 1980 Quadrajet for a 4.9 liter turbo. Now if this was an 81 US spec computer controlled carb, it would be 1708 1273. Now I do notice that something's been changed here and somebody's been messing around. The carb plate, somebody drilled holes in the carb plate. Now I'm not sure why they did that, other than there may be something wrong with the choke or it was not getting enough air. It does set the choke, but I have to look into that a little bit further. Like I said, this car does run pretty decent. I mean, there's no noises coming from the engine. It's a pretty smooth running car, but I do notice that the carburetor could use some tweaking. And obviously looking at the holes drilled in that choke plate, obviously somebody's been in there and been messing around. So we'll get this carb off, we'll get it rebuilt, we'll get that choke plate either replaced or maybe even swap out the carb with another 1980 carb. But we'll definitely have to do some investigating on that. One other thing that I look for, the dipstick. Why am I looking at the dipstick? Well, I'm looking at it because it's a big curved piece, you know, and it comes up behind the firewall right above the distributor. That's the turbo dipstick. A non-turbo dipstick is really short and it would be over by the power brake booster. But because the carburetor is offset, they moved the dipstick and made it longer. Why do I look for that? Well, if it's got a short dipstick in it, that starts to throw a red flag at me that it's possible the engine was replaced with a non-turbo block. I've seen these cars that had 77, 78, 79 non-turbo 301 blocks in them that all the turbo components were bolted down onto it, and they had motor transplants. If somebody got a junkyard engine, put it in there. One of the things that I like to do before purchasing the car, and if it's possible, I understand that, you know, you got to have a seller that's willing to do this for you, but if they can go underneath the car and actually take a look at the side of the engine block right by the freeze plug and look for the casting that says 301T. Now, the seller of this car, he was a great guy, and he went under there, took a picture, and it did say 301T, and I was happy. That's just something I like to verify. Again, things to look for in these situations, because you don't want to end up with the weaker non-turbo block in one of these cars and then try to throw performance parts at it. Now, if you notice in the hood, there's no lights. This car was never equipped with hood lights. This is a 1980 model that, like I mentioned before in some of my other videos, in the live feed also, there's not every 1980 Turbo Trans Am and Formula got the lights. Only the pace cars did in 80. Those were guaranteed to get lights. So what does it look like on the back side of the scoop? Well, there, let's see if we can get in on it. There is the rear block-off panel. It is actually cast aluminum and has ribs in it. You don't see that very often. But this car is going to get the retrofit boost lights that I offer. So overall, not a bad solid old unit. So we're going to have some fun with this one. So stay tuned, you know, like, subscribe, and be sure to check back in when we start building this thing. Hope you guys enjoyed it and you have a good day.